The briefing room fell silent as General Morrison's coffee cup trembled against the mahogany table. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly under a blood-orange dawn, but every eye in the room was fixed on the woman standing at attention before the Joint Chiefs. Her name tape read CALLAHAN, and beneath it, the silver wings that had taken her through 3 combat deployments gleamed under fluorescent lights that suddenly seemed too bright. "Ma'am, with respect," General Morrison's voice carried the weight of 4 decades in uniform. "When I said pick any aircraft for this demonstration, I assumed you'd choose something appropriate." His fingers drummed against classified folders marked with red tape and warnings that could end careers. Major Katarina Ghost, Callahan's steel-gray eyes never wavered. Those eyes had seen Kandahar burning at midnight, had watched F-16 spiral into Afghan mountainsides, had stared down the business end of Taliban RPGs while keeping her voice steady on the radio. Today, they held something different, something that made colonels shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Sir, the B-1B Lancer is appropriate for the mission parameters you outlined." Her voice cut through the tension like aircraft-grade titanium. "Unless the Air Force has developed a sudden lack of confidence in its own strategic bomber fleet." The silence stretched taut as piano wire. In the corner, a CNN camera crew adjusted their equipment, unaware they were about to witness something that would dominate headlines for weeks. The Pentagon had invited them to document what should have been a routine capabilities demonstration. America's latest pilot training graduates showing off for the cameras, a feel-good story about military readiness. Nobody had expected Ghost Callahan to volunteer. Morrison's aide, a nervous lieutenant colonel whose hands shook as he reviewed flight manifests, leaned forward. "General, the insurance alone is covered under standard operational protocols," Callahan interrupted, her voice never rising above conversational level. "Sir, I've logged over 2,000 flight hours in theater. My record speaks for itself." What her record didn't speak to was the whispered conversations in officers' clubs, the barely concealed skepticism when she walked into briefing rooms, the way conversations died when she approached. 3 Purple Hearts and a Distinguished Flying Cross hadn't been enough to silence the doubts. The call sign Ghost hadn't come from her ability to disappear. It came from how others pretended she wasn't there. Morrison studied her personnel file one more time. Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan. Each deployment had added another scar to her legend, another reason why she should have been sitting behind a desk at the Pentagon instead of standing here, requesting permission to pilot a $100 million strategic bomber in front of live television. The general's decision would echo through history. He just didn't know it yet. The morning sun climbed higher over Nelly's Air Force Base as Major Callahan waited for an answer that would change everything. In the distance, a B-1B Lancer sat on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, its variable sweep wings folded back, engines cold but ready. The aircraft seemed to pulse with potential energy, as if it knew its moment was coming. General Morrison had built his career on calculated risks, but this felt different. The woman before him represented something the military wasn't entirely ready to embrace, not just female combat pilots, but the idea that warfare itself was evolving beyond the comfortable boundaries of tradition. Her request wasn't just about flying a bomber. It was about proving that competence transcended every assumption the brass had ever made about who belonged in a cockpit. "Major Callahan," Morrison's voice carried across the briefing room like distant thunder, "you understand the implications if this goes wrong. The media attention, the congressional hearings, the impact on the entire Women in Combat integration program." Callahan's response came without hesitation. "Sir, I understand the implications if I don't try." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a distant battlefield. "Every female pilot who comes after me will be measured against this moment. They deserve to know that when push comes to shove, we don't back down." The CNN reporter, sensing something significant, gestured to her cameraman. The red recording light blinked on, capturing what would become one of the most replayed moments in military aviation history. In boardrooms at Boeing and Lockheed Martin, executives would later study this footage frame by frame, recognizing the shift in public perception that would reshape defense contracting for decades. Morrison's aides spread tactical charts across the conference table, each one marked with potential flight paths over the Nevada test and training range. The demonstration was supposed to showcase precision bombing capabilities against simulated targets, routine for an experienced bomber crew, potentially catastrophic for a single pilot attempting to manage systems designed for 4 crew members. The B-1B isn't configured for single-pilot operation, the aide pointed out, his voice tight with concern. The workload management alone requires coordination between pilot, co-pilot, and 2 weapons systems officers. Even our most experienced crews have never faced the scenarios I've operated in, Callahan interrupted smoothly. Sir, with respect to our bomber crews, most have never dropped ordnance in contested airspace while taking ground fire. I've done that in aircraft with half the defensive systems and none of the armor protection. Morrison closed the personnel file and looked directly at her. Something in his expression shifted, the skepticism giving way to a harder calculation. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers who'd been tested beyond normal limits and emerged stronger. The question wasn't whether she could fly the mission. It was whether he had the courage to let her prove it. Outside, ground crews were already beginning their pre-flight inspections, unaware that their routine maintenance check was about to become preparation for a moment that would redefine military aviation. The B-1B's engines would soon roar to life. But first, the most important battle was being fought in a windowless briefing room where tradition collided with transformation. The decision hung in the balance as Morrison weighed 40 years of military experience against one pilot's unshakable conviction. Approved. The word hit the briefing room like a thunderclap, reverberating off walls lined with portraits of military legends who had never imagined this moment. General Morrison's voice carried the weight of command authority, but also something else, the recognition that he was about to witness history being written in contrails across the Nevada sky. Major Callahan's salute was crisp, professional, betraying none of the adrenaline that surged through her veins. 3 years of doubt, of sideways glances and whispered conversations, had led to this moment. The B-1B Lancer waited on the tarmac like a promise finally kept. Within minutes, the briefing room emptied as personnel rushed to coordinate what would become the most scrutinized training flight in Air Force history. CNN's crew scrambled to set up additional camera positions, their producer already imagining the documentary that would emerge from today's footage. Military photographers checked their equipment, knowing these images would appear in textbooks and museums. As Callahan walked across the tarmac toward the aircraft, her flight suit absorbed the rising heat of the Nevada sun. Each step measured and deliberate, she approached the B-1B with the respect reserved for machines capable of reshaping battlefields. The bomber's sleek profile, its wings swept back in landing configuration, represented more than engineering excellence. It embodied American air power projection, the ability to deliver precision strikes anywhere on the planet. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the crew chief who'd maintained this particular aircraft for 6 years, met her at the boarding ladder. His weathered face showed no surprise at her presence. He'd worked with enough pilots to recognize competence regardless of gender. "She's ready, Major. Fuel load at maximum, all systems green. Weather's clear for the next 4 hours." "Thank you, Chief." Callahan's pre-flight inspection was methodical, professional, her hands running over control surfaces and checking fluid levels with practiced efficiency. Rodriguez watched approvingly. Too many pilots treated pre-flight as perfunctory, but she understood that aircraft were partnerships between human skill and mechanical precision. The cockpit of the B-1B stretched before her like a cathedral of technology. 4 crew stations, normally occupied by pilot, co-pilot, and two weapons systems officers, now awaited operation by a single person. Digital displays flickered to life as she initiated startup procedures, each screen representing systems that typically required coordinated management by multiple crew members. Her hands moved across switches and controls with ballet-like precision, muscle memory guiding movements honed through thousands of flight hours. The aircraft's four General Electric F-101 engines spooled up with a rising whine that echoed across the base, announcing to everyone within miles that something significant was about to happen. In the control tower, Morrison watched through binoculars as ground crews cleared the area around the bomber. His decision felt simultaneously inevitable and terrifying, the right call that could easily become a career-ending mistake if anything went wrong. Radio communications crackled with pre-flight coordination between Callahan and tower personnel, her voice steady and professional despite the magnitude of what she was attempting. The B-1B's engines reached full power, their combined thrust capable of propelling the massive aircraft beyond the speed of sound at high altitude. As the bomber began its taxi toward the active runway, every person on Nellie's Air Force Base seemed to pause their activities, drawn by the sound of history in motion. The B-1B Lancer rolled down runway 21 left with the measured grace of controlled violence. 146 tons of strategic bomber accelerated through velocity markers that would have been impossible without the marriage of human skill and technological precision. In the cockpit, Major Callahan's hands moved across controls with choreographed efficiency, managing systems designed for multiple crew members while maintaining the split-second timing that separated successful takeoffs from catastrophic failures. Nellie's tower, Coulson Ghost, rotation speed achieved, positive rate of climb. Her voice carried across radio frequencies with the calm professionalism that had seen her through combat missions over 3 different continents. Below, the Nevada desert fell away as the bomber climbed toward its operational altitude, leaving behind a world of doubt and ascending into a realm where only performance mattered. In the tower, Morrison tracked the aircraft's progress on radar displays that showed the B-1B's climb rate exceeding normal parameters. The bomber wasn't just flying, it was performing, each maneuver executed with precision that silenced the skeptics who had questioned whether a single pilot could manage such complex systems. CNN's cameras captured the sleek profile disappearing into morning haze, but no lens could capture the significance of what was really happening. At 20,000 feet, Callahan began the demonstration sequence that would test every aspect of her training. The B-1B's variable sweep wings adjusted automatically as she pushed the aircraft through speed regimes that few pilots ever experienced. Mach 1.2 came and went with barely a shudder, the bomber's design allowing supersonic flight at high altitude while maintaining the precision required for weapons delivery. Ghost to Nellie's control, beginning tactical sequence, requesting clearance to simulated target area Bravo 7. Her voice remained steady despite managing navigation, communications, and weapons systems simultaneously. The demonstration called for precision bombing runs against ground targets using simulated ordnance, a complex ballet of speed, altitude, and timing that normally required coordination between multiple crew members. Ground controllers watched their displays with fascination and growing respect, as the lone B-1B executed maneuvers that showcased both pilot skill and aircraft capabilities. Each bombing run demonstrated pinpoint accuracy, the aircraft diving toward targets with controlled aggression before pulling up in climbing turns that stressed airframe and pilot equally. The CNN crew's initial skepticism transformed into awe as they witnessed flying that transcended routine demonstration. This wasn't just about gender barriers being broken. It was about redefining what individual competence could achieve when matched with appropriate technology and unshakable determination. At 30,000 feet, Callahan initiated the final phase of the demonstration, a high-speed, low-altitude pass over Nellis Air Force Base that would test both aircraft performance and pilot skill to their absolute limits. The B-1B's terrain-following radar guided the massive bomber through mountain valleys at speeds approaching Mach 1, altitude measured in hundreds rather than thousands of feet. Morrison and his staff watched from the observation deck as the bomber materialized from behind a ridgeline, its passage marked by the distinctive sonic signature of aircraft operating at the edge of their performance envelope. The B-1B's four engines produced a sound that was less heard than felt, a deep thrumming that resonated in chest cavities and reminded everyone present of the raw power under Callahan's control. "My God," whispered the lieutenant colonel who had questioned the mission's wisdom. His comment captured what everyone was thinking but few were willing to voice. They were witnessing something unprecedented in military aviation, a single pilot demonstrating mastery over one of the world's most sophisticated combat aircraft. The bomber flashed overhead at 400 feet, its passage creating the kind of moment that separates routine demonstrations from legendary performances. Callahan's precision was absolute. Altitude, speed, and timing executed with margins measured in seconds and feet. The difference between triumph and disaster compressed into split-second decisions made at supersonic velocity. As the B-1B disappeared beyond the horizon for its final approach, everyone present understood they had witnessed something that would be discussed in military circles for decades. The question was no longer whether female pilots belonged in strategic bombers. It was why anyone had ever doubted their capabilities. The landing approach began 20 miles from Nellis, the B-1B descending through layers of desert air that shimmered with heat and possibility. Major Callahan's hands moved across throttle controls with surgeon-like precision, managing the bomber's massive kinetic energy as it transitioned from supersonic predator to aircraft requiring a precise touchdown on a specific piece of concrete. Nellis Tower, ghost on final approach, runway in sight, requesting landing clearance. Her voice carried no trace of fatigue despite the physical and mental demands of single-pilot bomber operations. In the tower, controllers cleared all other traffic, recognizing that this landing represented the culmination of something far more significant than a training demonstration. The B-1B's variable sweep wings adjusted to landing configuration, the aircraft's silhouette transforming from supersonic interceptor to precision landing machine. Ground crews positioned emergency vehicles along the runway perimeter, standard procedure for any heavy aircraft landing, but today carrying additional weight given the unprecedented nature of the mission. Morrison watched through binoculars as the bomber lined up on final approach, its four engines throttled back but still producing enough thrust to propel lesser aircraft beyond their operational limits. The approach was textbook perfect. Airspeed, altitude, and angle of attack maintained within parameters that demonstrated complete mastery of aircraft systems designed for multiple crew members. Touchdown came with the soft precision that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. The B-1B's main landing gear contacted concrete with barely a whisper of tire smoke, followed by nose gear touchdown that completed what would be remembered as one of the most significant flights in military aviation history. Reverse thrust engaged smoothly, the bomber's speed bleeding away as it rolled toward the taxiway that would return it to its parking position. CNN's cameras captured every moment of the rollout, their footage destined to become part of military aviation archives and women's history museums. The visual of a lone pilot emerging from a strategic bomber would resonate far beyond military circles, inspiring young women who had never considered aviation careers and silencing critics who had questioned integration policies. As the engines wound down and ground crews approached the aircraft, Callahan completed post-flight procedures with the same methodical precision that had characterized every aspect of the mission. Her logbook entry would be simple and factual, but historians would later recognize this flight as a watershed moment in military aviation evolution. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez was first to reach the aircraft as Callahan descended from the cockpit. His smile said everything that words couldn't convey: respect earned through performance, not granted through policy. Outstanding flight, Major. This aircraft's never been flown better. The ground crew's enthusiasm was infectious, their professional appreciation transcending any preconceptions about who belonged in bomber cockpits. These men and women understood aircraft and pilots well enough to recognize exceptional performance regardless of its source. Their reaction would prove more significant than any official commendation in establishing Callahan's reputation among the people who actually maintained and operated military aircraft. Morrison approached the aircraft with measured steps, his expression unreadable but his presence signaling official approval of what had just occurred. The general's next words would either validate the demonstration or reduce it to a curiosity, and everyone present understood the stakes involved. The crowd gathering around the parked B-1B included pilots, ground crew, and civilians whose presence at Nellie's had given them front-row seats to history. Their conversations would carry news of this flight far beyond official channels, creating the kind of grassroots support that policies alone could never generate. Major Callahan. General Morrison's voice carried across the tarmac with the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that shaped careers and policies. The crowd fell silent, recognizing that this moment would determine how the demonstration was officially received and what it might mean for future integration efforts. Callahan's salute was crisp and professional, her bearing unchanged by the magnitude of what she had just accomplished. She understood that exceptional performance was expected, not rewarded, and that the real test would be whether her achievement opened doors for others or remained an isolated demonstration of individual capability. "Sir?" Her response was simple, direct, carrying none of the triumph that lesser pilots might have displayed after such a flight. The demonstration spoke for itself. Additional commentary would only diminish its impact. Morrison studied her for a moment that stretched across seconds but felt like hours. His decision would ripple through Pentagon policy discussions and congressional hearings, influencing defense budgets and personnel assignments for years to come. The weight of that responsibility was visible in his expression as he formulated words that would become part of military history. Outstanding airmanship, Major. The kind of flying that reminds us why America maintains air superiority. His words carried official approval, but more importantly, they carried respect, the recognition that competence transcended every assumption about who belonged in military cockpits. The CNN reporter stepped forward, recognizing the news value of Morrison's endorsement. "General, what does today's demonstration mean for the future of women in combat aviation?" Morrison's answer would be quoted in newspapers and played on television networks around the world. "Today demonstrated that when we focus on capability rather than category, we discover potential we never knew existed. Major Callahan didn't break barriers today, she obliterated them." The implications of his statement would reverberate through military academies and training programs, inspiring a generation of female aviators who would see strategic bomber cockpits as achievable goals rather than impossible dreams. Recruiting offices would report increased interest from young women seeking aviation careers, and flight training programs would adjust their approaches to accommodate broader definitions of pilot potential. As the crowd dispersed and the B-1B was towed back to its hangar, Callahan completed the paperwork that would officially document her flight. The forms were routine, bureaucratic necessities that couldn't capture the significance of what had occurred. But in pilot-ready rooms and squadron buildings across the Air Force, her achievement would be discussed and debated, analyzed and celebrated by people who understood what it meant to push aircraft and human performance beyond accepted limits. The sun reached its zenith over Nellie's Air Force Base as maintenance crews began post-flight inspections that would verify the B-1B's continued airworthiness. Their reports would note normal wear patterns and stress indicators, confirming that exceptional piloting had actually been easier on aircraft systems than typical multi-crew operations. The bomber had been flown to its design limits without exceeding them, testament to skill that complemented rather than compromised mechanical precision. In the weeks that followed, requests for B-1B transition training from female pilots would increase dramatically. Squadron commanders who had never considered gender diversity in bomber crews found themselves evaluating applications from women whose qualifications matched or exceeded traditional standards. The demonstration had created opportunities that policies alone could never have achieved. Callahan's call sign Ghost took on new meaning in military aviation circles. No longer was she invisible due to skepticism and prejudice. Now she was legendary, a pilot whose achievement would inspire stories told in officers' clubs and flight training academies for generations to come. Her name would appear in aviation history textbooks alongside Chuck Yeager and Jimmy Doolittle, proof that breaking barriers required more than courage. It demanded the kind of exceptional performance that silenced doubt through sheer competence. The ripple effects of her flight would extend far beyond military aviation. Defense contractors would begin designing cockpits and control systems with broader operator demographics in mind, recognizing that their most capable future customers might not match traditional pilot profiles. Universities would report increased enrollment in aerospace engineering programs by female students, and elementary schools would add her story to curricula about careers that transcended traditional gender boundaries. But perhaps most significantly, young girls watching CNN's coverage would see something they had never seen before. A woman stepping out of the world's most advanced strategic bomber, her achievement proving that the sky truly was the limit for anyone with sufficient skill and determination. In suburban bedrooms and rural farmhouses across America, future pilots were born from the inspiration of watching Major Katarina, Ghost. Callahan proved that excellence knew no boundaries. The Nevada desert returned to its eternal silence as the last echoes of jet engines faded into memory. But the impact of what had occurred above those ancient mountains would resonate through military aviation for decades to come. The B-1B Lancer sat in its hangar, no different mechanically than it had been that morning. The real transformation had occurred in the minds of everyone who witnessed what happened when skepticism encountered unshakable competence. Years later, as female pilots became commonplace in strategic bomber cockpits, military historians would trace the beginning of that transformation to a single demonstration flight over Nevada. They would note that Major Callahan's achievement represented more than individual excellence. It marked the moment when the Air Force truly understood that national defense required utilizing every ounce of available talent, regardless of its source. The general's decision to approve her request had proven prescient. In a world where threats evolved constantly and technological advancement demanded adaptability, diversity of thought and experience had become essential to maintaining military superiority. Callahan's flight demonstrated that the most important qualification for any mission was not conformity to tradition, but the ability to achieve mission objectives under any circumstances. The B-1B would fly many more missions, piloted by crews that increasingly reflected the diversity of the nation they defended. But aviation historians would always remember the first time a single pilot proved that strategic bombers could be flown with precision that exceeded multi-crew operations, opening possibilities that had been constrained only by assumption and prejudice. As the sun set over Nellis Air Force Base, painting the Nevada sky in shades of amber and gold, the transformation was complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but the fundamental question of who belonged in military cockpits had been answered with finality. Excellence was the only qualification that mattered, and excellence, as Major Callahan had demonstrated, could emerge from anywhere. The story of that day would be told and retold, inspiring generations of aviators who would push the boundaries of what was possible in military aviation. But for those who witnessed it firsthand, the memory would always be the same. The sight of a lone B-1B Lancer roaring over the ridge, piloted by someone who had transformed skepticism into respect through the simple act of being undeniably, incontrovertibly exceptional. In the years that followed Major Callahan's historic demonstration, the transformation of military aviation accelerated beyond anyone's expectations. The Pentagon's integration policies, once met with bureaucratic resistance and subtle skepticism, gained momentum from grassroots support among pilots and ground crews who had witnessed exceptional performance firsthand. Squadron commanders who had reluctantly accepted diversity mandates found themselves actively recruiting female aviators, whose capabilities had been proven rather than assumed. The B-1B program became a showcase for evolved military thinking, with bomber crews increasingly reflecting the demographic diversity of American society. Training programs adapted their methodologies to accommodate different learning styles and physical characteristics, discovering that variety in approach often led to innovation in tactics and procedures. What had begun as compliance with integration policies evolved into recognition that diversity of experience enhanced mission effectiveness. Callahan herself transitioned to a training role at the Air Force Weapons School, where her expertise in single-pilot bomber operations became the foundation for emergency procedures that would save lives in combat situations. Her techniques for managing multiple aircraft systems simultaneously were studied and adapted by crews operating in contested environments, where personnel casualties might require individual pilots to assume responsibilities normally shared among multiple crew members. The CNN documentary that emerged from that day's footage won Emmy Awards and sparked national conversations about gender roles in military service. More importantly, it inspired countless young women to pursue aviation careers, creating a pipeline of talent that would transform military aviation demographics over the following decade. Flight training applications from female candidates increased by over 300%, overwhelming recruiting offices that had never anticipated such enthusiasm. International allies took notice of America's evolving military aviation capabilities, recognizing that nations capable of utilizing their full talent pools possessed strategic advantages over those constrained by traditional limitations. NATO exercises began featuring increasingly diverse aircrews, with Callahan's achievement serving as a benchmark for integration success that other countries struggled to match. The technological implications proved equally significant. Aircraft manufacturers began designing systems optimized for single-pilot operation, recognizing that warfare's unpredictability might require individual operators to manage complex weapons platforms. The lessons learned from Callahan's demonstration influenced everything from cockpit ergonomics to automated system management, pushing aviation technology toward greater adaptability and reliability. Major defense contractors hired her as a consultant, seeking insights that could only come from someone who had operated strategic bombers beyond their design parameters. Her recommendations influenced the next generation of military aircraft, ensuring that future designs would accommodate the full spectrum of pilot capabilities and physical characteristics. The B-21 Raider program incorporated many of her suggestions, creating bombers that could be operated effectively by individual pilots when circumstances demanded it. Academic institutions began studying her flight as a case study in human-machine interface optimization, leading to research programs that enhanced pilot performance through better understanding of cognitive load management and stress response. Aviation psychology evolved to recognize that exceptional performance could emerge from sources previously overlooked by traditional selection criteria. The callsign Ghost became legendary throughout military aviation circles, But Major Callahan never allowed celebrity to overshadow mission focus. She continued flying and teaching with the same dedication that had characterized her combat deployments, understanding that her achievement carried responsibility to ensure others could follow the path she had opened. Squadron-ready rooms across the Air Force displayed photographs of that historic flight, not as inspiration, but as reminder that excellence was achievable by anyone willing to meet its demands. Young pilots studying those images understood they were looking at more than a successful demonstration. They were seeing proof that barriers existed only until someone possessed sufficient skill and determination to overcome them. The Nevada desert had witnessed many significant moments in military aviation history, from nuclear testing to experimental aircraft development. But locals would always remember the day when the sound of a single B-1B Lancer echoed across ancient mountains, carrying with it the transformation of assumptions that had limited military potential for generations. The general's decision to approve an unprecedented demonstration had proven that sometimes the greatest risks produce the most valuable rewards. As Major Callahan's career progressed, she would command squadrons, advise Pentagon leadership, and eventually retire as a general officer, whose influence extended far beyond her historic flight. But aviation historians would always trace the beginning of modern military aviation diversity to that single demonstration over Nevada, when skepticism encountered competence and competence emerged victorious. The sky, as she had proven that day, truly had no limits for those capable of reaching it.